Okay, so we're recording. That's good. I haven't done this for a while. Sorry, man. I have to check these things.
Oh, no problem, no
I
problem.
had a
The
break.
margins are tight.
I took myself away for a little while there. Want to try and find myself. Went off into the forest. Thought I'd done it. It turned out somebody just left a mirror in there. So
Five, four, three, two, one.
Puck short.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the One Puck Shot podcast, the first one of the 2019-20 season. We're about a month in, 10 or 12 games on the board for most teams. We're starting to get a little bit of an idea for who is hot and who is absolutely not. And I am delighted to have my good friend, In Goal Magazine colleague, contributor to The Athletic and Sportsnet, and all-around good guy joining me today. Please welcome to the show, Paul Campbell. Paul, hi, how are you?
I am very good. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We got there in the end. We had a little bit of technological difficulty getting through to each other at one point, but we got there, and we're back on the air, thankfully. What are your thoughts on the season in general thus far? A pretty good one, I think. A lot of stories and some high points, some low points, and all in all, a pretty competitive year thus far, I think.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing teams just utterly switch places this early. And I mean, it's really early, so you
Hmm.
can't say that this is how it's going to be. But as far as the beginning is concerned, I think this is a great way to start with teams. People weren't expecting to do anything at the top of the standings, and teams like Tampa Bay sort of barely hanging on to that middle ground for no particularly good reason.
Yeah, I mean, I jotted down some show notes as I always do, and I kind of had them down as what I call a dishonorable mention because they've not been flat out bad per se. I mean their 5v5 PDO is like a 105, which is crazy, but
Yeah, it's bananas.
their record is pretty mixed. They're just outside the playoffs right now. They beat the Devils last night, who I might come on to in a minute. But yeah, the Bolts have just been not quite the Bolts yet. Though I kind of have this inkling that somewhere along the line, something is either going to change or click, and they'll fly from there on out. And maybe this is the best thing that could have happened to them because it's given them some kind of kick up the ass down the road, hopefully, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm just looking at points percentage, and they're tied with the Canadians,
Hmm.
which I mean, come on, no one expected them to be anywhere near the middle of the pack
Right?
of the
Yeah.
league overall. And yeah, I think you're right. I hate to talk about adversity, especially this early in the season, but what you said about the kick in the pants, I think has some validity. They're just not clicking along, but they're still, hanging around in that middle of the pack. So when they do get things together, look out. I mean, last night they scored six last night.
Yeah.
And
Seven.
I
They won
mean,
7-6 in
a seven.
overtime.
Okay, I mean when they turn on the Jets and let the horses go, it's just phenomenal to see what they can do. And I mean, New Jersey obviously made it a bit easier than another team might have, but it's just amazing when they start clicking. And so I don't know, maybe even last night was a turning point for their season, at least as far as their offense and their ability to sort of get together is concerned.
We mentioned that they played against the Devils last night, Wednesday night, depending on when anybody's listening to the show. I mean, the Devils have been one of the biggest disappointments of the season for me so
Yeah.
far. They added PK Subban, they added Jack Hughes, Corey Schneider was supposed to be healthy again, but I mean, they're 30th overall now. The overtime loser point they gained from that game against the Lightning put them ahead of Ottawa to put them into 30th overall. But their 5v5 save percentage is the worst in the NHL right now. They gave up 7 goals and 23 shots. It's just a horrible mess, the Devils right now. On
It's
Halloween,
like
no
no,
less.
well, yeah, exactly. It should be their day. It's like nothing's working all at once for them. You make a big acquisition like PK Subban, then you have a great a rookie coming onto the scene, and things are worse. And again, it's early, and they still have time to figure things out. But I think a lot of teams think that new roster acquisitions are instantly going to pay dividends, and that player is going to be at his top quality or the quality that you thought you were paying for or getting in the trade right away. And I think that often just isn't the case. So, I mean, we'll give them some time to settle in and see what happens. But in the early going, it's been rough.
Yeah, it sure has. I mean, a couple of the teams I noted down. The Kings, I jotted down because they've lost four straight and they haven't looked great, but I kind of feel like we almost expected Los Angeles to be bad again, even with a new coach
Yeah,
going in there.
I mean, I think you can only do so much with the pieces that you're given. And that team has been in decline for, I mean, several seasons. Poor Jonathan Quick. I mean, he's declining as you'd expect,
Yeah.
but. he was when he had his best seasons, he was behind an excellent defense who took away the backdoor play, who enabled him to play sort of his best self, right? To really get out there and challenge aggressively and to be the athletic Jonathan Quick, that sort of legend. And I was watching last night, and so, I mean, some of the opportunities that Vancouver had were just, point blank, lots of time. There was one goal, I forget who scored it, but Vancouver player comes into the high slot, drifts down a little bit into the low slot, waits, looks, and fires a shot, top blocker. Quick, good position, goes down. He waits him. He goes down. He's square. He's on angle. He's doing everything right. The shot literally grazes his blocker on the way up, grazes his arm, top corner. I mean, that's the kind of opportunity that you just can't allow someone, even if you're shorthanded, you can't allow someone that kind of time. And I think Quick has been victimized like that all season. It's going to be a long one for him.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I could use the Kings as a segue to one of two teams. One is a California rival of theirs. I'm sure nobody needs me to fill in the blank there, but I actually like to loop back to the Sharks in a minute. I'd like to look at the Minnesota Wild just quickly because they are tied with the Kings for the worst points percentage in the NHL right now. At .308, they've played 13 games, whereas the Devils and the Sens have played 10 and 11 respectively, which is why they're lower in the actual standings. But the Wild, 4-9-0 to start the season. They lost again to the Blues 2-1 on Wednesday. Devin Dubnyk struggled. Zach Pariso's only got like 3 goals. Several players basically aren't pulling their weight right now, and is this just a hangover from the end of the sort of Paul Fenton era into the Bill Guerin era, or is there something more fundamental to worry about in Minnesota, do we think?
I think Minnesota has to be one of, if not the blandest team in hockey to be successful. And they haven't been able to do that. They haven't been able to stifle chances offensively, and they haven't been able to and they haven't really been great at generating offense either, sort of historically. So they're relying on tight defense and Dubnyk to be, Dubnyk, like he can be, and that hasn't happened. And when you're allowing chances and your goaltender's sort of playing okay or a little bit below okay, it's just a recipe for disaster there. I don't know how they're going to right that ship, but it's looking really bleak early.
It sure is. And as I mentioned, the Sharks earlier on, they're another team which has disappointed a lot of people early on. We'll touch on the goaltending in a second because I'm sure there's quite a bit we could probably say about that. But the other striking thing is their offense isn't making up the ground. It isn't covering for those weaknesses in net right now. They're 4-8-1. They're 24th in goals for, and they've got the second worst defensive record in the NHL right now, behind again the Kings, who we've already talked about. I mean, can San Jose turn this around? You'd think on paper they have the horses to do so, even with Jones and Dell struggling in net. But the longer this goes on, the harder that gets, right?
Yeah, I mean, last season was a great example of a team shooting the lights out and making up for all their deficiencies in goal and on defense. I mean, when your defensemen are only defensemen in name, in some sense, right? When your defensemen are incredible handling the puck, are just great point generators, great scorers, then you're going to expect to give up some good chances. You're going to expect to get scored on, a lot. Now, the goaltenders aren't making it any easier on the team, but they were able to sort of overcome that last year. There's no reason in principle they can't do that this year, but I mean, as you know, hockey's such a fickle sport, and goal scoring, it comes and goes, right? You're going to have periods of the season where even with the most talented team in hockey, offensively, if you had it, you're just not going to be scoring the goals you'd expect to score, or that you need to be scoring in order to outpace your goaltending. So I think they're certainly in a lull like that right now. To expect them, though, to repeat last year's success, it's hard to rely on scoring that much from season to season. There are going to be fluctuations, right, in the output of different players. And if your goaltending is consistently poor, I don't know how a team overcomes that, 2 seasons in a row.
Right. And the other difficulty, and this probably starts to segue us into the teams that have been performing well or have impressed so far, is that division is not easy.
No.
It's the Kings are kind of the outlier, almost floating at the bottom, but Edmonton seems to have figured it out off the back of two guys. We can touch on them in a minute. The Canucks are playing pretty well right now. Vegas are Vegas. I don't think they've played their best hockey yet, but you'd favour them to do pretty well. And to me, the Ducks are like an honourable mention under the most impressive bracket because they've had a solid start to the year. Guys like Getzlaf are performing. Their young guys are performing. Gibson and Miller in net is one of the best tandems in the game. That's a real big ask for the Sharks to overhaul some of these teams who are feeling good about themselves right now.
Well, how disheartening is it too when you have all the guns up front, and you're being sort of outpaced in the standings by a team like the Ducks, right?
Right.
That is supposed to be in transition. That's supposed to be, on paper, a poor team, certainly poorer than they have been even in previous seasons. But if you look at the leaders in team save percentage this season, most of the top 10 in the league in points are also top 10 in save percentage. One of the outliers there is the Ducks, who aren't in the top 10 in the league. They're in the middle of the pack, but they're up there in save percentage. So again, as you'd expect with that tandem, John Gibson is excellent and Ryan Miller is very good still. So that's gonna cover a lot of sins. In some ways, they're the opposite of the Sharks. Their goaltending is really doing well and should be expected to. But the offense isn't there, right? The sort of the horses up front aren't there. So it's an interesting comparison and case study, and it shows you that if you can get good, consistent goaltending, it could paste over a lot of those flaws. Whereas if both your goaltenders are struggling, there's not really much you can do unless you can shoot the lights out.
No. Just on the point about getting scoring, let's have a brief word on the Oilers because it's fair on one hand to maybe accuse them of still being that two-man team. I mean, Draisaitl has 12 goals and 24 points to lead the NHL. McDavid has 23 points. He's about fourth or fifth in those among those league leaders. But they went out and got James Neal, who had never failed to score 20 goals in a season outside of last year, if I remember rightly. Or maybe his rookie year he missed. But, he'd been a good 20 to 30 goal scorer year on year. Bad year with the Flames. The Oilers went out and got him. They put him alongside, Nugent Hopkins for a period of time. I think he played third line the last couple of games. But, the Oilers' holes were in net. Maybe they've addressed that. Smith and Koskinen have been okay so far. But secondary scoring was a thing. They've got a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit seems to have been enough for them.
I think Neal is... It shows you how quickly people can turn on a player. And opinions on a player can turn. Yeah. And this is directly related to age. So as soon as a player hits 30, right, the 30, 31, 32, and starts to get into that range, as soon as they have a down season, everyone thinks, well, that's it. There's the decline. They're done. And I mean, that's not exactly how aging curves work. First of all, everyone's different, right? So some people are going to be able to sort of plateau and maintain that for longer than others. But even statistically, you wouldn't expect someone to be a perennial 20-goal scorer and then suddenly score, I don't know how many he scored last year, but it was a handful of goals. I think it was 6 all season. And then to be done. I mean, barring injury or some other external circumstance, there's no reason for that. So, how was he being used, right, last year? And how is that different from how he was used previously? I mean, the Oilers did a good job in sort of securing that trade. Basically, when the Flames sort of bottomed out Neal's value, I think the Oilers saw a way to capitalize and to actually enhance his value when they brought him over, and he's been deployed in a way that suggests that the Oilers understood what they were getting and who Neal was and how to best use him.
Yeah, as we mentioned, the Oilers, they're doing pretty well. I'll give the Avs a quick stick tap, as it were, leading the Central Division right now. They've got a couple of injuries, Landeskog and Rantanen, but they've had a strong start too, as have the Predators, maybe not unexpectedly given the Nashville roster, but the three top teams in the league right now, the Capitals, Bruins, and the Sabres. We'll do a quick word on the Capitals first, as they're first overall. It seems like the logical way to do it is to go first, second, third. 9-2-3, John Carlson's been amazing, 23 points thus far. Ovechkin, 11 goals. And they're the league leaders with 53 goals in total. Washington seem to have got their groove back lately.
Yeah, and what's even more shocking, I'm just sort of looking at some numbers here. The Capitals, their team save percentage right now is .894. So I mean, they're getting sub replacement. Well, you can't say it's all goaltending, but basically they're putting up a sub replacement level of puck stopping, or team defense, I guess is the best way to put that. But they're still managing this remarkable record. I mean, it's a testament to the core of that team that they're able to year after year consistently produce. And as you said, Karlsson, I mean, is for my money, the front runner for the Norris this year. I mean, that's just an astounding start to his season.
Yeah, right now, absolutely. And, if you want to talk about way too early awards picks, like you say, he is the front runner for the Norris right now. In the way he's playing, you wouldn't bet against him to carry it through. And that's the crazy thing. And the other thing, you mentioned this on the team save percentage. Holtby had a pretty rocky start to the season.
Yeah.
One game he gave up 3 goals on 3 shots and got yanked. But he's looked better the last sort of week, call it a week. So if you can have a kind of a weak spot like that you can overcome, and then that weak spot kind of sorts itself out, that's pretty scary for opposing teams.
And that's it. And when everything bad happens all at once, that's when you see a team go into a nosedive. So when players are underperforming, right, offensively, defensively, your goaltender's underperforming, then you get into that terrible spiral, right, where the team goes into a 10-game slump where they get 3 points, and suddenly that might be it for the season. Ideally, you have your offense firing when your goaltending is weak, and vice versa, right? Your power play maybe is failing, but your penalty kill is excellent. And so during a season, you expect maybe some of these things to hopefully balance out. And that's what's happening in Washington right now, which is great. Holtby's getting back on the ball. I think that's going to make a great difference for them going forward, even when they cool off offensively. I mean, I don't expect Karlsson to keep up an almost point-per-game pace for the season. That would be remarkable. However, by allowing fewer goals, they're going to be able to overcome that later in the season. So hopefully for them, that'll balance itself out.
Hot on the heels of the Capitals are the Boston Bruins. They are second overall right now. They've also played 2 games less than Washington, so you would assume at some point they might jump past them. They've got a fantastic defensive record. They've only conceded 25 goals. They've won 9 of 12. They've won 4 in a trot as part of that. The next game is against Ottawa on Saturday, so you would assume they would be in a good spot to continue that streak. David Pasternak's been brilliant. He's got 12 goals and 24 points. Brad Marchand has 21 points. Tuukka Rask and Yaroslav Halak have been brilliant. The power play's at 30%. I mean, there's only so many superlatives you can kind of put before a team this early in the season. But man, Boston have been pretty good too.
Well, I mean, and this is the opposite of the case we were just talking about, or some of the earlier cases we were talking about, where everything's going right at the same time. To have your best players, outpacing everybody early on, to have your goaltenders just dominate. I expected the Bruins to be one of the strongest goaltending tandems this season, like they were last year, and they haven't disappointed at all. Their team save percentage right now is .934, which is astounding when you're considering that's. It's early and the sample's small, but that's still excellent. Those are excellent performances by both goaltenders, as you'd expect. I was on HockeyViz today, and I was looking at Bergeron because, why not? Why wouldn't you be looking at Bergeron on HockeyViz? And I'm looking at his even strength defense, and it's minus 22%. So basically, like, he's doing 22% better than league average at limiting offensive chances against. This visualization, I wish I could show you on the pod, but it's this like calm blue ocean on HockeyViz, which indicates that he's allowing when he's on the ice, very few chances are allowed from the most dangerous areas in front of the net. I mean, the only places where he's allowing any shots to go through when he's on the ice are essentially from the points, which goaltenders absolutely love. And that's obviously helping Rask and Halak to excel.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, we've handed out the Norris to Karlsson. We've basically just handed out the Selke to Patrice Bergeron.
Yes, that could happen every year, and it wouldn't be even though it's probably not exactly fair, it wouldn't be a crime if he won pretty much every season.
That's true. Okay, so in that vein, a possible Hart Trophy candidate come April, May time on the Buffalo Sabres is Jack Eichel. I don't know if he will win. Let's be honest. If Edmonton get in the playoffs, Connor McDavid is going to win it. But the Sabres are pretty hot right now.
I think Leon is
he should be.
He's tied for the league lead now in goal scoring.
Yep.
And I expect McDavid to outpace him, but as of right now I think he's the MVP in the league. Draisaitl, he's been everything for that team. Obviously, he and McDavid have been everything, but he's been just a touch more productive, I guess, even if he hasn't been better per se.
No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. Sorry, we kind of loop back on ourselves. The Sabres, as I was saying, Eichel's been pretty good for them. Carter Hutton, Linus Ullmark have been pretty good. I mean, it's strange the way that Mike Bales goes to these places as goalie coach, and suddenly the goaltending improves so much. But that was one of the
what a coincidence!
I know, right?
Going into the season, everyone was like, well, how do they expect to, do anything or get better with this tandem? Well, this tandem's been pretty darn good. I mean, at one point, I remember talking to you about this. Carter Hutton was leading every single major goalie category, right, on the NHL.com stats site. That hasn't happened in a long time. And they're keeping up. They're not keeping up that level of play, but they're still playing really well. So maybe we can expect that to continue.
Yeah, I mean, they've conceded 33 goals in total. That's a better record than the Predators, the Avs, the Capitals we touched on. It's pretty good going. The Hurricanes are sort of there or thereabouts again in the Metropolitan Division, and the Sabres have got a better defensive record, which is not something you maybe would have expected of them after last season. You would have looked on them as a team where the offense had to lead the way, but they've been pretty strong in both ends under Ralph Kruger this season.
And they've been shutting it down. Yeah, yes. All this is qualified, right? I don't want anyone to play this in April and say, "Wow, these guys said these guys were crazy." Well, going off what we've seen so far, right?
Yeah.
These are where these predictions come. I think if we're talking about trophies, Olofsson has been absolutely what a breath of fresh air, right? I mean, not a young rookie, right? I think he's 24, and he's been just fantastic. He's been productive. He's been everything they needed, and way more than they expected, even from last year.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think Ralph Kruger's very much in that conversation for the Adams right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think Barry Trotz probably should be in the conversation, but I don't think anybody's ever won it 2 years in a row. And the Islanders are still the Islanders. They've got a few injuries right now, and yet they've still won 7 straight. It's a weird situation on Long Island. I'm not going to complain as an Islanders fan, but Kruger's done good things with the Sabres. You mentioned Olofsson's certainly the front runner, I think, for the Calder after his hot start. Though I think that's a kind of class that might start to pan out and even out a little more. You got Cale Makar in Colorado, the Hughes brothers, maybe even Eli Samsonov if he plays enough games in Washington. It's an interesting class of rookies this year. I mean, we've touched on the Hart and the Norris. Have you got anybody else who might jump in anywhere, do you think? I mean, the Vezina for me right now is probably a split between Rinne and Rask, just based on the early play. But again, that's another one that can really change over the course of a season depending on games played and injuries and even just teams' fortunes and the impact they can have on a goaltender.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I mean, Boston's so good right now. I expect Rask to carry the load mostly, but I think Halak's going to get in a lot of games this year, and he's playing great. The difference between Rask and Halak statistically so far is pretty small. Between Rinne and Saros is pretty big. Saros has had a pretty rough start so far. So, I mean, it looks like Rinne is going to play more games. He's playing lights out, whereas his backup isn't. And so that gap indicates to me that maybe Boston's stifling defense it has a little more to do with Rask's success than it does Rinne's. Maybe give the nod to Rinne right now, although either way, I think you can't go wrong.
Just a couple of news and notes before we wrap up, Paul. The Roman Josi contract finally came in, 8 years, $72.5 million. The annual cap hit is just a shade over $9 million. A few people have sort of crinkled their brows at the length. Josi does turn 30 on June 1st, but I think given the kind of level he's played out and the comparables, people like, the Carlsons, the Burns, maybe the Dohertys of the world, I don't think that's a bad deal, comparable to those other top-level defensemen. And the other thing, which I think is key to this is, as I mentioned, Josi is 29 now. He turns 30 in June. There's a lot of other guys in that 25 to 30-year bracket for the Predators. Their core almost entirely falls in that range, with the exception of Pekka Rinne, who's 36. But, Duchene, Forsberg, Johansson, Josi, they're all around that 25 to 30 age bracket. They're in win now, right? They're win now mode.
Well, that's exactly it. And they're going to have they have a decent-sized window right now. I mean, with their core at those ages, you don't expect things to be declining much, right, over the next couple of seasons. But you couldn't get the guy for a couple of seasons, and they couldn't afford to let him walk. So you got to give him term, you got to give him some cash, and basically you're paying for the present in the future. So, he's going to be 37 and everyone's going to be like, wow, this wasn't a very good idea. How do we get rid of this cap? Maybe there's going to be some cap recapture if there's a trade, if there's a retirement, whatever happens. But basically they've said, okay, well, the future is now. Let's go for it. And, he's a great player. I mean, sometimes you have to pay more term than you'd like to keep a player of that caliber. So I can see why they'd make the decision. It makes sense, even if it seems like a bit of an, if not an over payment, then an over term.
One last one, Paul, just before we go. Vladimir Tarasenko sidelined for 5 months. He may miss even more time depending on how he recovers from the shoulder problem. How badly does this affect the Blues?
Pretty badly. I think they're a good team, but I've loved Tarasenko ever since he came into the league. He's such a dynamic scorer. He's such a fantastic release. You have to miss that. I mean, top level scoring is really hard to come by, and when you have someone of that caliber, he's made a great impact on that team. They have a Stanley Cup in no small part because of him.
Yeah.
He
was huge in February for them last year as well. He's got like 20 points in February.
You just can't replace that, right? No matter who comes up, no matter who outperforms, you still have that massive hole, right? That goal scoring hole that's going to be really hard for them to climb out of. So, I mean, and it's not like they can just tread water and wait for him to come back. I mean, it looks like, he's been shut down for most of the season. We'll see, right? So they're going to have to do it without him. And of all the injuries teams have sustained recently, I think early in the season, I think that's maybe the most significant. A potential cup contender like that to lose its most dynamic forward is it's massive trouble.
Yeah. Awesome, Paul. It's been great to finally get you on the podcast.
Yes, it's been a long time.
It's been too long. We finally got there in the end with hiatuses and breaks and schedules and families and jobs and stuff.
And the ocean. The
ocean is a pretty significant factor, yes.
Yep.
Where can people find you online?
Way to go, Paul, on Twitter is where I am mostly. So if you go there, you'll be able to get to the rest of my stuff.
Awesome. Paul, thanks again for your time today.
Great. Thanks very much, Rob.